Did Julius Caesar invent the Caesar salad, or is it simply named after him by restaurants? We all may have thought about this question for a long while. While Caesar's story may be our favorite, here are 20 famous foods that are named after historical figures we all know. Oysters Rockefellers were a sign of the wealthy, as it was a meal you would only find at their table usually. This dish also had more than just its expensive, premium ingredients going for its rich image. It was named after John D. Rockefeller, who, if you're not familiar, was the Jeff Bezos of the mid to late 1800s. He was arguably the richest man who had ever lived in America, and it was more his public perception than any involvement he had with the dish which led to it being named after him. See, just like people hear Bill Gates and think in billions, people did the same for Rockefeller. So, if you wanted something to just sound rich and have that air of luxury to it, you would name it after him. The actual dish itself was made by Jules Alciatore at Antoine's restaurant in 1889. Maybe not as hype of a story as you were expecting, but the dish itself delivered on the image it was trying to capture. Every part of the rich sauce, the premium oysters, and the presentation screamed fine dining. If you could apply catfishing to names, then that would explain how Caesar salad eventually got called that. Somebody asks you that at gunpoint, and your first memory or coherent thought is going to be about Julius Caesar. It just is a mental instinct. He is the most recognizable Caesar there ever was. However, he wasn't the only Caesar, and the actual credit for creating this legendary salad goes to Caesar Cardini, an Italian-American restaurateur. The first ever Caesar salad was made in Tijuana, Mexico, during a fully packed 4th of July weekend in 1924. The legend goes something like this. Cardini found himself desperately short on ingredients and decided to trust his cooking skills and salvage the situation through improv cooking. He had lettuce, croutons, parmesan, olive oil, and Worcestershire sauce, and a few other things. Lo and behold, the Caesar salad was born, and it was here to stay. So just like the salad, people seem to confuse Napoleon pastries with another famous military figure, Napoleon Bonaparte. In actuality, we are not too sure where the name came from, but we have a pretty good guess. See, in French, you call this pastry millefeuille, which translates directly to Napolitain, which is also a reference in and of itself to Naples, Italy. What is the connection here? Well, this style of multi-layered pastry is popularly believed to have first come from this city itself. There is no actual link to Bonaparte or any record of him enjoying this kind of pastry, but the word Napolitain itself got watered down to Napoleon eventually, which may have been the source of the confusion. So there are a couple of legends that surround beef Wellington. Despite being an iconic dish that has spread over several continents and carved a non-negotiable place for itself in the global food scene, even getting featured in shows like MasterChef and Hell's Kitchen, nobody really knows the exact specific details behind the name. Our best guess is that it was made as a celebration of Duke Arthur Wellesley's victory of Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, and since the Duke was already a big fan of beef, truffles, and mushrooms, the Wellington was conceived in his honor. Some historians like to believe that it is actually just an English take on the French dish, filet de bœuf en croûte, which is also a puff pastry filet mignon steak combo that looks and tastes a lot like a Wellington. They may have gotten the name from the kind of shoes Arthur wore too, which were known as Wellingtons, and also looked like one as well. They had that same shiny polish. Alfredo Di Lelio was an Italian chef who had the privilege and honor of inventing the fettuccine Alfredo. Yes, the very same pasta that has become a staple of so many millennials and Gen Z adults today, and a staple at any restaurant that promises a slightly fancy dining experience or a properly high-end one. The story behind this dish is actually what makes it sweet though, because Lelio was not trying to invent a new culinary wonder at all. He just wanted to give his wife her appetite back after her pregnancy took quite a toll on her body. And loss of appetite is a common symptom for women who were pregnant, among a host of other issues. Nothing seemed to be working and she was turning down all food, but she needed nutrition badly. This led to Lelio making the first Alfredo ever known, and we do not think he knew that his simple desire to make something his wife would excitedly eat would become such a world-famous dish. Honestly, today, you would not encounter a kid ordering a Shirley Temple at a bar, and if you did, you wonder what that even is. Hearing Shirley Temple might give you strong images of a woman in her 60s enjoying a fancy cocktail, and you would be half right. It is a cocktail, but a non-alcoholic one that was made for a 1930s actress who was quite the star, and as you can probably guess, was named Shirley Temple. It was created for Shirley during her time as a teenage actress, so she could enjoy a drink that resembled a cocktail, but was non-alcoholic. It was just ginger ale, lemon lime soda, and grenadine. It just looked appealing enough, and the cherry on top sold it as a proper drink even harder, though it was just for kids. Chateaubriand steak actually has some pretty esteemed origins, since it was named after François-René de Chateaubriand, who was a French politician active during the start of the 19th century. While his politics were not particularly noteworthy, the steak that Chef Marie-Antoine prepared for him using a pretty chunky cut of Chateaubriand was iconic, to say the least. François loved it so much that the dish got a rep for pleasing the top dog at the time, and as a result, it caught on. Still, it did not coast to its place as a popular steak for high-end restaurants to serve just by a fancy backstory. It also tastes incredibly delicious, and taking one down yourself can be quite the challenge. Sticking to foreign cuisine that you can find on menus today too, and in fact, so much that people do not even know they are foreign, we have margherita pizza. Ever wonder why it is called margherita? Once all the way back in 1889, the Queen Consort of Italy took a visit over her territory and wanted to indulge in the local cuisine more than anything else. Even royals get sick of fancy buffets sometimes and want to try the good stuff that you can only find in the streets. One of the most recommended things are Neapolitan pizzas, and so a pro pizzaiolo was called. He impressed the Queen by making a thin crust pizza with an incredible sauce, and moreover, how the three main ingredients represented the Italian flag. Mozzarella, tomatoes, and basil matched up with the white, red, and green of Italy. The Queen ended up loving the pizza so much that Raphael named it in her honor, and she even expressed her approval. Guess a recommendation really does get you places. We all have gotten so used to eating sandwiches, but do you ever wonder who had the idea of calling meat, vegetables, and cheese stuck between two slices of bread a sandwich? It was actually named after the Earl of Sandwich, John Montagu. As the story goes, Johnny himself was a big fan of gambling and spent most of his evenings glued tightly to his seat at the gambling table in his favorite casinos. One of the things that gave him the ick was how his hands would make the cards greasy as he ate while gambling. So one day he asked for 2 pieces of meat stuck in between slices of bread. This was not something that was unique to John at the time, but him ordering it and making it a regular meal he would have at the casino elevated its status to a must-try dish. As a result, the convenient meal that is meat and veggies between bread known as the sandwich gets its name from a man's love of clean gambling. Graham crackers were named after Sylvester Graham, who was a Presbyterian minister. He wanted something that worked in a health-conscious diet and was based around whole grains, so in the 1800s he started advocating for a diet that involved more of that and less of meat and flour. As a part of his efforts, Sylvester ended up making the Graham crackers, which would become the national snack and breakfast of America throughout the ages, especially in tough times. Do you know how many families got to carry out their day because they at least had some crackers? Some sources tell us that Lemuel Benedict, a notable Wall Street broker, took a trip to the Waldorf Hotel in New York City, and he was suffering from one of the worst hangovers of his life. He asked the staff for the ingredients to what would eventually make up an Eggs Benedict, and the chef at the time, who was either Oscar Cherky or Charles Ronhofer, became pretty impressed with the list of ingredients. They ended up modifying a little and adding it to the menu of the hotel, and in honor of Lemuel, they decided to call it an Eggs Benedict. There are also rumors suggesting that Ranhofer created the dish at Delmonico's, a popular restaurant for influential people and politicians. There were 2 regular customers called Ms. and Mrs. Legrand Benedict, and it is said he made it for them, but the Waldorf Hotel story is the one most people buy as the truth. Once, Dame Nellie Melba was staying at a hotel known as Savoy in London, and there she was thoroughly sick. For reference, Melba was a very renowned Australian opera singer, and Auguste Escoffier happened to be a big fan of hers at the time. Escoffier pioneered several French dishes that became famous in the culinary world, and Melba toast was the latest addition when this story took place. Anyway, let's get back to it. So Damie needed food that was light and easily digestible. What was she to do? Auguste decided to make a type of toast that somebody on a pretty limited diet could eat, and Dame loved it so much she decided to eat it regularly even if she was not sick. Auguste decided to name the dish after her, one of two dishes that had the honor. The second was the peach melba, which was a dessert with peaches and vanilla ice cream. Talk about being a dedicated fan. Dr. James Salisbury was a famous 19th century physician and nutritionist who helped spread the gospel of a high-protein diet in America during a time when interests in foreign cuisine and fast food were rising. His theory was that diet could help in disease prevention, especially with things like digestive issues. He also warned people of the after-effects that a high-starch sugar diet could end up having. But simply throwing caution into the public's face would not cut it. He needed to do something to catch people's eye. That was a crucial part of people's diet needed to be lean meat, especially ground beef. He believed that a crucial part of people's diet should include lean meat, especially ground beef. Not exactly true and a habit that people would adopt, but hey, the steak is still doing numbers. Carpaccio was named after the Venetian Renaissance painter Vittore Carpaccio, and it was made in the middle of the 20th century at a bar called Harry's in Venice. Giuseppe Cipriani, who founded the bar, invented the dish for a countess customer, Amalia Mocenigo. She was going through some health troubles and was recommended a diet of sliced raw beef with a lemon juice and Worcestershire-based sauce. Cipriani, inspired by an exhibition of Carpaccio's work, named the dish in his honor as a sign of respect. Carpaccio itself is now one of the most widely believed appetizers and extends to tuna and salmon too, and the dish is as elegant as it was back when Cipriani first made it. One of the most popular stories behind the naming of crêpes Suzette is that in 1895, an assistant waiter named Henri Charpentier at the Café de Paris in Monte Carlo served the future King Edward VII, the same man who later ruled England. Back then, he was the Prince of Wales, and one of his guests was an esteemed actress known as Suzette. Charpentier was supposed to serve them crepes, but ended up setting the sauce on a raging fire, which resulted in what we would know as crêpes Suzette. The prince ended up enjoying the meal so much, however, that he sincerely suggested it be named in honor of Suzette. Now the dish has become one of the mainstays of French cuisine, and it continues to be a very dramatic and extravagant dish to make for someone close to you. The Waldorf salad ended up being made at the Waldorf Hotel in New York City during the end of the 19th century. They named it the Waldorf salad because of how well it was doing, and it was one of the best things Oscar Cherky made during his time as maître d'hôtel. He proved to be a necessary ingredient in developing many of the most beloved parts of the menu of the hotel, and this salad was just one of the few ones he was responsible for. When it first came out, the salad just involved diced apples, some cut-up celery and mayonnaise, and then served as a starter. It did so well due to how light and refreshing it was, and over time, more ingredients were added as it became a hotly demanded item. If you ever find yourself up in Austria, you will discover a cake that the locale does not play about, which is known as Sachertorte, one of the finest chocolate cakes a person can have the pleasure of eating. Franz Sacher was the mind behind it, and he was just a young, up-and-coming pastry chef when he made this dish working at a restaurant in Vienna during 1832. He was 16, spending his days as an apprentice chef cooking for Prince Clemens von Metternich, who was a really powerful Austrian statesman. As it so happens, he ordered a special dessert for some important guests, but the head chef was ill that day, and so Franz had to take over. What happened then was him stumbling onto the Sachertorte cake, which the prince and his company loved so much that they associated the dish with Franz forever after the fact. Remember how we talked about peach melbas and how they were the second thing Auguste Escoffier named after Dame Melba? He was a devout and passionate adorer of her work, and he definitely had a delicious way of expressing it. One day, while she was performing at the Covent Garden House in London, she was staying at the Savoy Hotel where Escoffier happened to be the head chef. He knew his chance as soon as he saw it. and after her performance in Lohengrin, he made a dessert that was just for her. This was the very first version of the peach melbus, which had a swan-shaped ice structure in the middle as its most noticeable trait, besides the flavor, of course, which Dame ended up loving thoroughly. Bananas Foster is an incredible vanilla ice cream and banana-based dessert, flambéed before serving. It was named after Richard Foster, who was a notable businessman in New Orleans, Louisiana. The head chef at Brennan in New Orleans, Paul Blange, made the dish when there were extra bananas in stock. As it happens, Richard was a pretty close friend of the Brennan family, and Chef Blange decided to name it in his honor. He thought it was a fitting homage, as not only was it a spectacularly sweet dessert, but the flambé process also added an extra flair. Now that's one famous list filled with foods named after A-listers. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe and let's keep these memories alive.